Ready? Are you ready?
That's what I was thinking.
Ready? So I normally do this story, I guess you call it, when I do immigration, or even like I don't know. Well, I just stock market for my other grandfather, but this is a really good story. Okay, so I'm gonna pass this around. If you guys want to take a look at this, what we have here first is this is George Hammond Bender. Okay, so this is he would have been my great-grandfather on my mother's side. So this is, and look at his eyes. I mean, this guy's like steely, you know. I mean, he can like look through you. Notice that they're not like smiling or anything. So back then, nowadays everybody's smiling in the wedding photos and stuff like that. They're not touching. Okay, it's kind of a sign of the times. This is around like I don't even know exactly, but it's like between 1900 and 1920. I don't know. So that's my grandmother. So that's my grandma Bender. Okay, so his name was George Hammond Bender. And so supposedly he came from Germany. Okay, so if you guys want to take a peek at these, or this one's kind of coming out, you can take a look at that. So why am I telling you this story? So he comes over and he ends up marrying my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was from out west and from a farm. So it's kind of like typical American Pie woman. All right, so you got this guy coming over. He's married, Miss American Pie, and that's kind of fishy in itself if you think about it. But so they get married, and supposedly, like I was telling you, he came over from Germany. Now, and I'll tell you how I got these documents later. So, long time ago, what do you call it if you come over to a country now and you live here for a while? What do you have to have? It's a card. It's a green card. But back then they didn't call it a green card. They called it an alien identification card. Yes, my great-grandfather was from outer space. I'm just kidding. Okay. But that's what it was called because aliens, outside the country. Okay. So if you look on this was his exact, this was the card he used for a while. You go down here, and you'll notice that Mr. Bender was a metallurgist. What's a metallurgist? Have you ever heard of an alchemist?
Yes.
What's an alchemist do? They turn what into what? They turn metal, regular metal, into gold. So that's the whole alchemist thing, okay? So he worked obviously with chemicals and stuff like that. So he was connected to metals and chemicals and stuff like that. Okay. So my grandmother was one of 8 daughters. So they had 8 daughters. My grandmother, I think, was the 3rd oldest. Okay. And like I said, they lived out west for I don't know how many years, maybe 3 or 4 years when my grandma, she was really young, but she remembers living out there. And, several of those years, later on she found out that her father had been arrested a couple times, and but nobody really knew why, and it was really kind of, hush-hush and whatever, nobody could say anything. So then they moved to Detroit. When they moved to Detroit, back during this time period, a lot of people lived and Detroit was vibrant back then, a lot of people lived in apartments. Most of us buy houses. You could buy apartments back then or live in apartments. They had one apartment that was their apartment that they lived in, and then he had another apartment that was a laboratory. So the entire apartment was his lab. Okay, so he would go in there. My grandmother the kids would go in there once in a while, but they weren't supposed to, touch anything, and they also weren't supposed to ask questions. He would leave for days on end, and he would come back, and nobody knew where he was, but you weren't allowed to ask questions. Okay, and when my grandmother would go into the laboratory, she said that she saw beakers, and she saw books that had hieroglyphics and weird symbols, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? But they didn't know. I mean, they're kids. They didn't really know what any of this stuff meant. He was a metallurgist, right? So there's this weird kind of mystery going on. So to make this part of the story short, he ends up getting sick, and he goes in the hospital. He goes in the hospital, and he's there for 12 days, and he dies. Now, I've got the death certificate right here. You guys can take a look at it. And the reason for his death was a ruptured appendix, or appendicitis. Now, do you normally die from that?
No.
Not usually, okay? And so that was kind of strange. You know, the guy was only 42 years old. I mean, he's like my age, right? He's a very young man. And so if you guys want to take a look, you can. So you can see that's straight from Detroit. Yeah, I do. Dude, I'm telling the story. You walked in the middle, man. They're going to get the whole story, though. You can say if you want. Where you come from?
Bobby, sit down. It's Chinese.
All right.
Sit down. Bobby, have a seat.
Oh, you got to go later.
All right, we're ready.
It says now you can wait. Okay. All right, so where was I?
Hospital, he died.
Ah, okay, so he's in the hospital and he dies. Okay, so my grandmother and all the kids, you know, they go to the funeral. They go to the funeral and they come back from the funeral and his entire laboratory, every single piece of anything is gone. Yeah, swear to God. It's all gone. Now, first of all, who took it? What? They came back from his funeral. And what was a funeral take? Maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 hours, whatever. They come back, and the laboratory apartment, where he had his lab, all the lab stuff was missing. It was gone. Someone took it. Right?
Wow.
So, by the way, at this point, when my grandma's telling me this, we thought he was a Nazi spy.
Oh.
No, he came from Germany. I mean,
To this tie.
okay, right? All right, what?
The triangle is tie. He's Illuminati.
So, it's Illuminati, yeah. So anyway, I mean, that's pretty kind of strange, don't you think? I mean, first of all, who did this? Why did they do it? And then when anybody asks questions, they're like, don't ask me those questions. So so time went on, obviously. My grandmother, as she grew up, and remember, this is like right before World War II. So when World War II rolled around, as I was telling first hours, my grandmother was like, kind of like Rosie the Riveter. She worked on, you know, planes and stuff like that. And but every so many years, these guys would show up, and they would talk to her boss about her, you know, trench coats and the suits and that. They would never talk to her. They would talk to her boss. And she always thought that was kind of strange too. Like, what's going on? Are they checking up on me because of what my dad did? Nobody knew. Okay. And then later on in life, I remember my grandmother saying, she went and asked her mother. She goes, I really want to know about Dad. I don't know anything about Dad. I want to know more about Dad. And she goes, if you really love me, you'll never ask me that question again. Okay, right? And she asked her uncle once. Her uncle started like telling the story, and then her mother cut him off and said, and that was it. Like nobody was allowed to talk about it, and some people knew about it. So, as my grandmother got older, again, she was curious about her father and what he did. So she went down to the Detroit Immigration Office, and she wanted to find out the information, because they have records on all of us, you know that, right? Okay. So, yeah. Well, you can just go on the internet, too. So, it's amazing what they know about you on the internet. So she went down there, and she wanted to get his records. And she goes there, and she goes, I want my dad's records. This is his name. And they come back out, and they say, I'm sorry, ma'am, his records have been closed for 50 years. Now, seriously, whose records are closed for 50 years? JFK, aliens, I mean, whatever, you know what I'm saying? People, I mean, so what did he do to make his records close for 50 years? So then she waits 50 years, because she was older, you know. She goes back, and she asks again, she goes, and actually the first time, I think the documents that you guys are looking at, the alien identification card and the other one, she did get those. I can't remember if it was the first or second time. I think it was the second time. She goes back after 50 years, and the lady comes back and says, we don't have any files. All right, so then I got interested. She's telling me the story, and I'm riveted, just like you guys. And I'm like, I got to find out about this. Yes, Dave?
How come it doesn't list a hospital, just as receiving hospital?
That's what it is. It's Detroit Receiving Hospital.
Oh, okay. I thought it was just like the hospital received it.
It's the name of the hospital. It's the name of the hospital.
And it says he's a chemist on here.
Right, which is, yeah, it's easier to say chemist, you know. So, where was I?
Yeah, records.
Oh, I got
green
curious.
card
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm like, I gotta find out about this, right? So, you know, at the time there was a show called Unsolved Mysteries. You know, I wanted, yeah, you know. So I started doing research. I tried the Freedom of Information Act, nothing, you know. Then I actually paid online for this company. We can find any records that you can give us. Okay. All right, here's some money. Didn't find anything. Okay? Couldn't find anything. So, then I was talking to my sister-in-law, and she knows somebody that's in the government that has some kind of confidential things, and they were saying that if that's true and the records were sealed, the only one that could actually get those files is the president signing something saying, you know, I don't know if that's true or not, but so I kept researching. Okay, so let's jump a little bit more to the present. So then. My grandmother, she writes a letter to her congressman trying to get the information. Didn't get anything. She goes to, so my grandma used to work for TWA. She used to fly around the world. She wanted to take one last trip. She's in her late 70s. She goes, I'm going to Russia. I'm like, awesome, you should go. So she goes to Russia. It's in 2001. And while she's there, guess what happens?
She beats Bender.
9/11.
Oh.
She's in Russia, going down a river, on a riverboat, okay, and 9/11 is happening while she's on this riverboat. It's kind of a cool story too. So it's on the news, and since we're learning about the Cold War right now, this is ironic because the Russians, this is after the Cold War, the Russians start playing the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh.
Kind of cool, huh? Okay, so she gets off the boat, she's ready to come home, but all the airports are crazy because they're not letting people in the United States. I don't know if you guys remember that. No, you're too young. And so she gets on a plane in Germany, and she sits next to this lady from Germany. My grandmother talks to everybody. She starts telling her about the story. And this lady becomes very interested in the story. And she's coming to the United States to visit her son or somebody, like in Iowa. She gets to the United States. My grandma comes here. They exchange, you know, letters and stuff, you know, because people used to write letters to people. And this lady's so fascinated by the story that she goes to the library every day for an hour, because that's all she could do, because they would, you know, there's times. She goes to the library and she starts researching this story. And she writes my grandmother a letter. Okay, I'm going to read you the letter right now.
So wait, this is your great-grandfather, right?
Great-grandfather, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's why I'm so interested in this stuff. So I've read all these books on this. All right, so she writes my grandmother, and this is what she says. She says, "Dear Eva," this is my grandma's name, "glad to hear from you. Now that is an amazing report you have to tell me about your father. As I was reading it, something very strange came to mind. In fact, I may be way out of the ballpark, but here are my thoughts. Based on the early passing of your father, his Egyptian hieroglyphics, his unusual job, the formulas, etc. Well, on a lot of pyramids in Egypt, there's a unique design called the Flower of Life, which holds the key to every aspect of life: physics, chemistry, cosmic law, music, body and form, atoms and dimensions. Actually, is an intersection of circles. Being able to decipher and apply this knowledge meant great power." Here's a side note for me, because I've done my research. The Flower of Life, the design, have you ever heard of geometric, sacred geometry?
The one that you're telling us about.
They say that this symbol is the beginning of life, but it's based on math. So if you guys want to take it, you'll see me wearing my belt buckle. I have a belt buckle like this. Okay. So, okay. All right, so being able to decipher and apply the knowledge meant great power. In fact, the pyramids are not burial chambers, but initiation centers where passage from one dimension to another was practiced. You ever see the movie Gate? Oh man, I know it. I just watched it. I can't believe it. I can't remember this. Ah, jeez, I don't even remember now. Okay, I'll tell you later. So, all right, yeah, from one dimension to the next. All right, all right, fine. Now you say so, but what does this have to do with the USA? Well, for many years, research was done, and believe me, in high gear today, in the United States, of making ships, people, etc., invisible to radar screens. You just need to know how to move from one dimension to another. Now, I don't know if you guys know this or not, this is true. In 1943, the Philadelphia experiment, books are available, was set into motion, or set into action where a U.S. battleship really disappeared from the radar screen. Do you guys know about that?
No.
Read the book, it's fascinating. So they actually made a ship disappear. I don't know if you guys believe in wormholes or stuff like that, but it could be related to that. And then it reappeared, but when it reappeared, the guys, some of the people, were in the boat. Like in the actual walls of the boat, if you understand what I mean?
Oh.
Okay, 'cause it didn't really work right. Okay. Alright. Alright, so it says, I'm sure, it says, unfortunately, the crew either died or ended up in the loony bin. So, you got to read the book. It says, I am sure often attempts by the government were made before that, but probably still classified. Also, your father's stay in the Montana-Dakota area is fairly close to the Four Corners, where hieroglyphics, mummies, etc. were found in 1925.
They found Egyptian mummies.
In the United States, in 1925. Alright, however, these places are off limits to the normal citizen, so my theory, perhaps your father worked on very classified projects. Why would anybody steal his notes in Egyptian records books? What was your father's cause of death at an early age of 42? Natural causes seems out of the question. Golly, this sure is a mystery. I've enclosed the information for the Freedom of Information Act, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then I started doing all this reading. I already read Philadelphia Experiment, and then it led me to other books, and then I started reading about the Flower of Life, okay? And they were doing experiments on some of the stuff. They were trying to do time machine information in Montauk, New York. Really fascinating stuff. It's like the X-Files. So, okay, so then I'm like, I kind of hit a dead end. I'm like, you know, something that was going on here is connected probably to this, because this makes a lot of sense to me. How many of you guys believe in fortune tellers? All right, I think there's something to it.
Here's what we've got over there.
All right, so this is where we go to the edge. So then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to fortune teller because I think it's fun. And this woman claimed that she was she's psychic, but she could talk to people from beyond. I'm like, okay. So I didn't tell her anything. I didn't tell her anything about my grandfather. By the way, if you guys remind me, I taped it. And I'll bring it. I'll bring the tape. But you got to remind me. And I don't know if I can even find it. So I go in there and I'm getting my palm read or something. And she's like, "Well, I can do this too." I said, "Yeah, I want you to tell me about my grandfather, my great grandfather." And she starts talking, and she goes, yeah, he was somehow connected to the government. I'm seeing like some kind of, he's working for somebody and he's like a spy, and I'm like, because we're thinking he's not a spy, right? So I'm letting her go, I'm like, okay. And she's like, yeah, but, and because apparently he could talk to her and then she would talk to me, right? And he's telling you, she's telling him, yeah, I'm really proud of you and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I'm really curious about, you know, was he a good spy or a bad spy? Well, he worked, supposedly, from what she said, for the U.S. government and was doing secret things, but it was good for the United States. So he was technically a good spy.
How did he die?
And that's the end of the story.
What? You didn't ask him how he died?
No, I didn't. I'll have to try to find the thing. So, isn't that an incredible story? I swear, I always wanted to like write a book on this, but it would be like a short story, you know what I mean? But it's all true. I mean, I don't know what exactly he did, but what I told you is what I know is true. So pretty interesting. So in the past, you can turn on.